Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Sabrina Feliz and I will be your CLED World Languages host for this webinar titled Simple Strategies, Major Impact, Making Education Accessible to All Students. Before we begin, I would like to mention the rules for this session. So this session will start at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Bear in mind that this has been recorded, so you will receive the recording and the PowerPoint presentation later on. The length of the session would be of 60 minutes plus 30 minutes for questions and answers. Please ask your questions using the Q&A feature and use the chat feature sparingly so as not to disrupt the session. Due to time constraints, participants will not be able to take turns speaking, and we will answer as many questions as time allows. Our speaker for today is Dr. Tania Heap. She's Director of Learning Research and Accessibility in the Division of Digital Strategy and Innovation and adjunct faculty in the Department of Psychology, University of North Texas, and accessibility consultant at Lady Bird Learning Solutions. Tania's background is in practice-based research in educational technology, digital accessibility, and universal design for learning. Thank you very much for being with us today, Tania.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you all for this opportunity, and thank you for joining the webinar today. If you're okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, I hope that everyone will be able to see the slides in front of you. This is the title slide, Simple Strategies, Major Impact, making education accessible to all students. I hope everyone can see it. Thank you, Sabrina, for introducing me. So I guess let's get to the heart of the presentation today. So what are we going to see today? We'll start with some disability facts and figures as they pertain particularly to the US landscape. We're going to go over headings, lists, and tables, and I hope that these instructions today in this hands-on webinar will be useful to you, even to people in the audience who may have just been may have just been exposed very briefly to digital accessibility, and they want to learn more about how to make their content accessible. But if you already have some experience doing that for your students, I still hope that it will be a good refresher for you. We're going to go over also use of images and color to say that it is fine to use images, it is fine to use color, but it's important also to use something else to make it accessible for all, even for students who can't see images and can't appreciate color. And finally, we're going to go over simple strategies. Again, you don't need to be an accessibility expert to make your content more accessible. It's just a matter of knowing where the quick strategies, tips, and tricks are to make your content much more accessible. Sometimes it takes literally just 3 or 4 clicks to make a huge difference in a document. So before we actually get started on the rest of the presentation, I want to get some information from you all, because even if I already prepared the presentation and it may be too late to tailor it significantly, I will definitely go over, make more emphasis on certain document formats if I know they're really popular among you, or also depending on your own context where you're teaching, what is exactly is your role. So I'm asking you to go open your browser or maybe on your phone, type pollev.com, pollev.com/Tania Heap, TANIAHEAP 646. So it's on the screen. I'll repeat that, pollev.com/Tania Heap 646. If you go there, you should see the first question. I'm just asking you a couple of questions. I'm going to escape the presentation briefly and see if some of you have already responded. So the first question for you is, which of the following job titles most closely aligns to yours? I'm just curious to see what is the audience today in front of me. I know we have many participants today. I see K-12 educators. I see four-year college or university educators. Okay. I see probably instructional designers, maybe media professionals, graphic designers. I grouped everyone there. And I'm that too. I kind of fit the four-year college educator. I have a past as instructional designer. I'm an education leader. So I see lots of peers there. So interesting. Community college educator too. Okay. None of the other options. I should have kind of curious because I left that as an option, but maybe at the Q&A session, we'll learn more about all the other people who don't fit this category. Where would you come from and why you're here? But an interesting mix, mostly K-12 educators and a good chunk, also a good representation of four-year college educators. Okay, great. Okay, so the next question for you is, I'm going to deactivate this one and go to the next activity. So which electronic document formats do you use the most? This is not multiple choice. It's a free-form text, so you can type whichever document format you use the most in your teaching, or if you're an instruction designer, which documents do you work the most to help your teachers? Let's see, Google Suite, okay. Word, I guess Word documents, Google, Schoology, okay. I don't have experience with that. PowerPoint presentations, okay. Canvas, okay. I didn't go over Canvas today because I didn't know how well it was presented. I'm a Canvas user too, but I think that some of the tips and tricks that we'll cover today apply to Canvas as well. Word, I see Word, Google are pretty popular. Schoology, I'm not familiar with Schoology. I should have done my homework earlier, but hopefully some of those tricks again will apply to that. In the end, many of the accessibility best practices, even for online and printouts, are applied across the board. PowerPoint presentations, Canva as well, Edpuzzle, Quizlet. Okay, I'm familiar with Quizlet, Kami, Edpuzzle. Okay, good mix there. PDF, PPT, PowerPoint, multiple, PowerPoint presentation, PowerPoint, PPT, Mentimeter. Okay, I've used Mentimeter before. It's not very accessible. Polev is more accessible. Just FYI. Quizzes. Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm going to close trivia. I'm going to close DVD. Okay. An interesting mix there. I see mostly Google with some Word and also Canvas. Okay, I will probably say something about Canvas as well. It's really helpful to know that. Well, thank you for participating. And let's go back to the presentation. Let's look at the disability facts and figures again with reference to the US landscape. So why are we here tonight? Why am I talking to you? And why is this important? Well, over a fourth of the US population have an officially disclosed disability, whether it be visual, hearing, mobility, or cognitive, according to the Center for Disease Control in 2020. That 26% is a percentage of people who officially chose to disclose a disability. So obviously, it is very likely that there is a sizable percentage there of people who live with a hidden disability, or maybe a seen disability, but they just decide not to disclose it for some reason. So I'm going to guess personal opinion that percentage is probably over 30%. The unemployment rate for people with a disability in 2021 was about twice as high as the rate for those without a disability, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. Fortunately, the unemployment rate for both people with and without a disability lowered a little bit since the pandemic, but it's still the unemployment rate for people with a disability tends to be still twice as high. There are multiple reasons for that, obviously, but in general, again, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, people with disabilities are less likely to hold a full-time job. Oftentimes, it is because they have to have reduced hours, but it is also true that some people with disabilities disclose they're often willing to seek a full-time job, but they're unable to find one. People with disabilities are also less likely to hold a bachelor's degree or higher and hold a managerial professional occupation. Depression is 2 to 10 times more common among people with disabilities, and one of the reasons also cited that lead to depression is also the inability to gain high quality opportunities for education, to access education and to learn a skill or trade, knowledge that can be used, that can help them enter the profession, and obviously the inability to find a gainful employment. So it really is, being able to create high quality education and use quick, simple strategies to make it more accessible really has I would say like a ripple effect, a very long-term impact for these people. Types of disabilities, according to the biopsychosocial model of disability, To simplify things, we can group disabilities under 4 categories: hearing, visual, mobility, and cognitive. By hearing, I don't just mean deaf people, but also people who are hard of hearing. Visual does not just include blind people or very low vision people, but also color blindness. And in fact, up to 8% of white men tend to be red or green colorblind, which is the most common form of color blindness. I did have, over the course of my experience, I've had students who are red or green colorblind in my class as well. Mobility could be inability, not just a wheelchair user, that too, obviously, but also inability to use a mouse, slow response time, limited fine motor control. So if you're creating activities where it requires maybe students to press, a small, locate maybe a very tiny button and they have to use their mouse to get there, it might be harder for some students to do it, or they may just be unable to do it. Or maybe they can't even use a mouse and they can only use a keyboard. Cognitive, here for simplicity, there are also different kind of schools of thought, but here we're grouping cognitive and learning disabilities in the same very broad category. So we're including also working with people with dyslexia or dyscalculia, distractibility, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder. Also here we could group also people with temporary disability, like maybe brain trauma or similar. And so we're trying to, in this webinar, to talk about issues that could affect users with different types of disabilities, maybe one, maybe more than one, and including unseen disabilities as well. And I should have not exit the presentation, sorry. So I'm going to show you also pictures. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those, but just to give you a quick idea of some of the assistive technologies that people with disabilities use to interact with hardware or software, or digital online content, including Google Suites, Word documents, etc. Assistive technology, the definition for that would be a device, or it could be software. Assistive technology could be software or hardware. In this case, this refreshable Braille keyboard is actually a piece of hardware that users utilize to interact with digital materials and be able to access them in the same way as non-assistive technology users do. So in this particular case, a blind user or a very low vision user who is proficient in Braille will use a Braille display or refreshable Braille keyboard. It's connected to their computer and they're able to read whatever text is on the screen. It will be translating to Braille to them in real time. Another example is a screen magnifier. Oftentimes people with very low vision will use a combination of screen magnifier and screen reader. The screen magnifier, as you may be able to see, maybe appreciate from this picture, this is showing a person looking at the computer screen that uses a screen magnifier. I think that's actually ZoomText. ZoomText is probably the best known screen magnifier, and it enables users to focus on one element at a time and to really zoom into each individual item. Sometimes they use a combination of screen magnifier and screen reader. The screen reader is a software, almost like an operating system that is superimposed on your current operating system, and it really helps the user. It will read them out loud, all the text that is on the screen. It will give them additional information about how maybe a web page is presented. If there are multiple regions on a web page, maybe there is a navigation menu, maybe there is a main region. So we'll guide a non-sighted user to describe to them the information that is presented on a screen. Another example of assistive technology is the headband, which is common, like a mouth stick as well. It's common among people with mobility disabilities, but maybe they're capable of moving their head well. And so they usually wear this, what looks like a head covering, looks like a helmet with a long stick, and they can interact on a touchpad or a keyboard by moving their head with their head movements. And so that's one of the assistive technology that some people with mobility disability use. So before I go to the list of questions, yes, I'm going to present you this list of questions. So if you're not, even if you're new to digital accessibility, or even if you already had students with disabilities, and maybe you've already learned something along the way, But think of this, if you're concerned about whether your digital materials or even printed materials are accessible to students with a wide range of disabilities. Imagine, for example, if you use a lot of color and images in your class, but maybe you have low vision students or you have colorblind students. How do you still make sure that they access the same information as those who can see your images? So you can ask yourself, think of this. You may not have answers to all these questions, but starting with this question and having an awareness, to me, that's half the job done. You will already have fixed, I would say, roughly half of the issues in your class. So as you self-diagnose whether your class is accessible, your materials are accessible or not, ask yourself some of these questions. Can the software that I teach with, whether, Google Suite or Quizlet or Canvas, Microsoft Word, maybe something else, Photoshop, maybe you're also teaching your students about digital photography. Can the software I teach with be used with only the keyboard? Of course, I don't expect you to know if that's true or not. In my team, we do that. Usually they reach out to us and say, hey, can you test this? And we have a team of testers. But even knowing that this is an issue, just be aware that some people can't use a mouse. Don't expect that everyone will know when you say drag this item to this item. Some people only use a keyboard entirely, exclusively to access content. So being aware that if that's an issue or not really goes a long way. Do my video and audio materials have captions or text transcripts? So if you use any videos in your class, even YouTube videos maybe, do they have text equivalents? Is there a transcription of what's being said on the video? So keep in mind that if you're deaf or hard of hearing, obviously you may be struggling. Or if for whichever reason, if you're teaching in class, it's very noisy, or maybe your students want to rewatch the YouTube video at home, or maybe they're at the gym and it's very noisy. Maybe they want to be able to open the subtitles and be able to read what's on the screen. So for example, on YouTube, you can easily check if the captions are available. There is a symbol of it's like a symbol of a pop-up with text, or sometimes it's shown as CC, and you can toggle it on and off, and they will show you if the captions are available or not. But in either way, even being aware that video and audio, it is prudent to have an alternative text description for video and audio already goes a long way, just knowing that. Do all the images in my class have appropriate text descriptions? If you use images, which is fine, but think of this, if your images are important and somebody can't read the image, what are you going to do about that? Well, you can write an alternative text description for that, maybe on your same Word document. There are also ways in which you can enter the alternative text description. It's hidden behind the image that only, for example, blind users can access. And I'll show you later how to do that. Is the text in my class easily readable to students with low vision? Again, is the text in pixelated? Is it? Can you resize it? So think of issues like this. Some other question that you may be asking yourself: do all text and design elements have enough color contrast? So by that I mean something even as simple as imagine if you're using, for example, yellow text on white background. We're going to talk in more detail. We're going to show in more detail how to check for color contrast, but even that common sense of, maybe your text is light gray on a white background. Even if you don't have vision issues, it might still be hard for some people to read the text. Do all my pages include headings? We'll talk later about headings. I will just say for now that think of headings like titles on a section. Like in this particular slide, the title of the slide is Ask Yourself 202. There's also another subtitle of the section, CLET word languages. So these are headings. This is what we would call headings, which is nice to make big and bold and centered, but there is something else that is very useful to do to mark that as a heading, and really helps people who can't immediately see that that's a heading be able to jump on that section. And we're going to talk about that later. Same for tables and lists. Do I know if my tables and my lists are accessible? Well, there are some do's and don'ts for both lists and tables, and we're going to go over those later. Do all graphs use shape and texture in addition to color? As I explained to you earlier, you might be using maybe a bar chart in your class and you want to show different kinds of trends, or maybe a line graph. And if you just use full lines, even of different colors, it may be hard for some users to discern, to understand which line is which. And we're going to go over that later. But even asking yourself those questions is already, like I said, half the job done, in my experience at least. So let's dive deeper into headings, lists, and tables, with particular reference to Microsoft Office products and the Google Suite. So headings, like I said before, even the title of this slide is, it's called headings, but that's a heading. It's the title of the slide. So go, like I said, beyond visual cues. Don't make it just big. Don't make it just bold or center. That's fine for visual users. It may not be, even for students with cognitive disabilities who use a text-to-speech software to read the content to them out loud, having a proper heading markup. So something that actually labels the phrase or the word as a heading, really makes it easier for them to understand that that's actually a heading, that's not a paragraph. So the hierarchy, if you're able to actually label it as a heading, it will convey that information to non-visual users. As a visual user, it's almost intuitive to know where the titles and the headings are. Not so much for non-visual users. So if you don't use the proper tools in Google, in Word, in PowerPoint, imagine, I'm sure in some time in your life, at some point in your life, you received the giant text file. It was also, but it was just, imagine 20 pages in a text file. That's the experience of, for example, blind users trying to access a page on Google documents, Word documents that has 0 headings. That's really experience. So when thinking about how to structure headings, you might think, okay, the hierarchy. So if there are multiple levels, how do I do that? Think of of the structure of a book. Heading 1 is the book title, or the website title, or the syllabus title. There is only one heading level 1. It's the title. Then heading level 2s, that's why I use the S. Multiple heading level 2s are chapter titles. So maybe you have the book, let's say, I don't know, it could be like Introduction to Economics, and then you have chapter 1 something, and then chapter 2. So chapter 1 title will be a heading level 2. Then in chapter 2, there might be multiple section titles, like section 2.1 and section 2.2. That would be a heading level 3. So there's a hierarchy there. So it goes back to one level if you're going to the next chapter. And it really goes a long way for many users, and even for yourself, because if you're accessing a very long document, it is really easy to jump from one section to the other. For example, if you have a table of contents or a list of figures, list of tables, it really is very easy then to create a table of contents if you're using the proper markup for headings. So how do I format headings in Word document and in Google Docs? So in Word documents, you go from the Home tab. Usually when you open Word, the first tab, the default tab that's open is Home. So that should be easy. Navigate to Styles, and then use Styles to format the headings and choose heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. In Google Docs, you go to Format, and then you click Paragraph Styles. And in Paragraph Styles, it will show you the different list of headings. I'm going to show you some examples in pictures. I'm showing you, this is a screen capture of Microsoft Word document, where it's showing the visual interface of how the styles pane looks like from the Home tab. You see there is no space like normal. Usually the normal, now it's not showing there. Normal is paragraph. Then heading 1 is actually the title of the document. Heading 2 would be a section title that's hierarchically below the title of the document. And section 3 would go, heading 3 would go below whatever heading 2 is covering, and so on and so forth. In Google Docs, you navigate to Format, you see from the toolbar, and then you select paragraph styles, and then you select the styles that you want. Normal text at the top, you see that normal text is really for paragraphs. So whatever you see there in the screen capture that starts with lorem ipsum, that's a normal text. But if you want to use titles, you start with heading 1, and then heading 1 for if the title of this document, for example, is pet resume, I would say pet resume is heading 1. Personality, health and grooming, about the owner. These are probably titles just below that, section titles on the same page. These would all be heading 2s, I think. I'm going to pause for a moment in case I know there are some probably questions in the chat. I know we have a 30-minute Q&A, which is very lengthy, but I just wanted to give you a moment to digest and maybe ask questions already in case you're struggling or what have you. And then maybe at the end of the session, we can go over your questions, and maybe we can even go over some of the other items in the presentation. I know it's a lot of content that I'm trying to cover today. I'm trying to keep it basic, but trying to cover the basics really for digital accessibility, which is still a lot. So feel free to, ask any questions. I will be glad to clarify any confusion at the end of the 60-minute presentation. How to format headings in PowerPoint or Google Slides. Kind of same principle, a little bit different. So you go to home in both cases, whether you're using a Microsoft PowerPoint or Google Slides product. From home, you choose slides, and in slides, you choose layout. When you're choosing the slide layout, stick to the placeholders in the layout. For example, in this particular slide, before I added content, before I added the title, it's called How to Format Headings, I had a placeholder there that told me, click to add title. This is what you want to use to add the title to your PowerPoint or Google slide. Don't delete that placeholder, and don't insert a text box. Avoid text boxes at all costs if you can. The reason being, there are two reasons. One is, if you insert a text box and you put it at the top to simulate the title, by default, the screen reader will read that last. So it will read everything else. It will read the KWL webinars, Collect Word Languages. It will read the bullet point, and then it will read how to format headings, because a text box is considered ancillary. So it goes at the end. You can reformat the order. You can do that too, but I still don't recommend it, because if it's not using the placeholder for the headings, again, it messes up the structure of the document, and somebody who can't see it or uses the content differently will really benefit from knowing where the titles are in each slide, using the proper slide, using the proper placeholder for the heading. Let's look at lists. Lists are very simple, I find them. So there is just one thing to keep in mind about lists, very easy. The list needs proper markup to be identified by non-visual users. And by markup, again, I say that you need to use the proper tools that you're giving, the proper buttons. So whether you have Word, PowerPoint, Canvas, if you're editing a page in Canvas, you will see there is a very similar symbol for bulleted lists and numbered lists. So select the text, the content that you want to turn into a list. So it might right now it's paragraph mode. You have every list item. You go back a paragraph and you have list items. So you select those and you click the list button, whether it's a numbered list or just bulleted list. Don't simulate the list. By simulated list, I mean what I'm showing on the slide. I have 3 list items and I simply added a dash before them. Some people add asterisks before them. Some people even add numbers like 1 period and then 2 period. But if you don't use the proper list button, for example, if I'm a screen reader user and somebody formatted the list the way they should, and I approach the list, the screen reader will tell me, let's imagine that we have a number list of 4 items. As I approach the beginning of the list, it will say list of 4 items, 1, blah, 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 2, blah, 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 3, blah, blah, blah. And then it will say end of list. If it's a bulleted list, same thing, list of 6 items, bullet, and then the list item, bullet, blah, 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 bullet, blah, 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 and then end of list. If it's simulated, it will not tell me anything. So it's not so much of an issue if you have a list of 3 items, but if your whole page is a giant list, it's really hard for users to even skip to the relevant list item that they want to go. Like they say they want to go to point 6, they can easily skip to 6 until they hear 6. If it's everything simulated, it's just a giant paragraph. It will not tell them it's a list. It will not tell them that there is a dash there, unless they have the settings on their screen reader. They call verbosity settings on high, which means the screen reader will even read them semicolon, colon, like seriously colon. It is not helpful colon because, but most users keep their verbosity settings lower because it's just convenient. Unless they didn't really have to, they don't want to hear all the symbols and the punctuation marks and all of that. And obviously they won't even read the dashes. So very simple trick here for lists, just use the buttons that are given to you. I'm going to show you in this demo an example of a syllabus of a course that I taught, a class that I taught last year. And I'm using Microsoft Word here, and I'm showing you how I use the styles pane from the Home tab in Microsoft Word. Experimental Psychology Syllabus is the title of the whole document. So I go into styles and I click just heading 1, boom, it becomes a heading 1. It doesn't just change visually, but it really changes the markup. It is flagged now as a heading level 1. Then there is a subtitle there called Psych 3000 section 2. That's heading level 2. And then I have multiple other section titles like instructor information, course overview. I also have course objectives. And so all of these, I consider them to be the same hierarchy. So I'm going to click on those, select those and click them as heading level 3. By default, for example, in Microsoft Word products, the heading levels are by default formatted in light blue in Calibri, but you can right click on each heading item. You can right click on them, or if you can't right click, you can use Shift F10, navigate to your chosen heading to change the font style and size. Shift F10, right click and modify. Hit modify, and you can change the color. You see I'm doing that now on heading level 2. I can change from blue to this orange rust color. I can italicize it, I can bold it, I can increase even the space, I can center it. I can change the font style and size, and that will apply to all the heading 2s. So you will see actually the difference here when I actually go into heading 3, because we have multiple heading level 3s. So I hit right click heading level 3, modify. I'm modifying heading level 3 to be a brown color from the color blue. And you see, boom, it carries over to all the multiple headings in the document. So if you do it from there, it will change for all of them. If you just select the actual phrase, it will only change for that phrase and not for the whole headings. You see in this demo, I'm also formatting lists. So if I have a list of items like this, like I said, no dashes before the sentence, select your future list and use the button like the bulleted list or the numbers list button, numbered list up button in Word or in Canvas, same thing in Google Docs. All of these apply to multiple pages, digital documents that you can edit. So let's talk a little bit about tables. Again, feel free to use the Q&A or chat for any questions. I'll be happy to go over some parts if they're not too hard, if they're being too hard to follow, maybe too new to you at the end of this presentation. So speaking of tables, again, I'm going to use I'm going to introduce you to some accessibility lingo here, but just to explain, hopefully it will be helpful to you, will give you some context for the things that we look for in evaluating document formats. Use data tables, don't use layout tables. So the difference between the data table and the layout table. I'm sure we're all guilty of that at some point, myself included. When I was still, I will say maybe 20 or so years ago, I was starting to dabble into web development, HTML, CSS, very basic web development. And sometimes I couldn't really figure out ways, I was starting, so I couldn't really figure out ways to make a page look pretty. And I thought probably that the quickest way to do it would be, even on a Word document, I would do that. I would create a table, make the borders white or just the borders of the table blend with the background, and maybe add a picture on the left column and then text on the right column. And the table was invisible. So visually, my new page looked really pretty. There was a table inside, but it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see it. Everyone will see that my page looks pretty. Well, that's a layout table, and it's useless. And it's not just useless. It is nobody in the accessibility world likes layout tables. It is confusing because if you're using a assistive technology that will tell you the content on the page that you can't intuitively see, it will give you extra garbage information that you were not interested in. So it will, as soon as you navigate to the hidden table, it will tell you table with 3 columns and 2 rows. And then it will even sometimes voice the content differently depending on whether the content is on the header row or a data row or a header column or a data column. I'm not going to go into the details about this. You don't need to know all of this. The whole point of this is to say, don't use tables to prettify your content. Tables should be used just for data, for displaying tabular data. And if you're using data tables, great. The other thing about data tables, keep them simple. By that, I mean, no merge cells, no split cells. They mess up the hierarchy. And for some users, it is not intuitive where the merge cell refers to in relation to which, header column or header row. It really makes it harder for them. And don't leave cells blank. If you're going to have a blank cell, maybe use NA, not available, or something that signals to the user that there is nothing, to be added to that empty cell. this is an example of a not so accessible data table from, I'm sure you use some of those in your class, in your syllabus. I find those all the time. I was guilty of those too, by the way. What you may notice here is that there is a merged row. The fourth row from the top, which is the row week 3, spring break, no class. It's being completely merged, which visually is probably okay for most of the users. They get that. But for some users who don't just look at the table visually, they access it using a screen reader, or maybe they access it using a combination of looking at the table and listening to the text-to-speech software. They might find that confusing. They may not know, okay, this is an additional, the table, the assistive technology is telling me that this is the 4th row, but it behaves different. It's just saying spring break, no class, and I have no way to navigate to know where I am now on the table. It's just more confusing for some users. There is also split cell under the 5th row, which is the work for week 4. This table is showing a list of weeks on the left-hand side, topic in the middle, and assignment on the right. I'm sure it's very common among you. Probably all of us have used something like this at some point. And in week 4, in this particular example, the educator is showing that there are 2 assignments, not just one. There is a discussion and also an essay, and they're both due April 2nd. So the educator decided in this particular case to split the table cell for assignment into 2 to show that it's 2 different assignments. But again, it's harder to navigate for some users and to know if both of them belong to week 4. It's not as intuitive. So the way to make it more accessible, this is an example of an accessible data table. So there are no split cells, there are no merged cells. There would have been, because there are no assignments on spring break, you see on week 3, which is the 4th row, I just formatted in the same way as I did with the other rows. There is a row for the number of the week, the row for topic, where I just added spring break, no class, an assignment, and A. There is no assignment. So again, if you have, and I'll pause for a moment, let you process all this information. I hope it's not too overwhelming. But as I learned, we have 30 minutes later for Q&A, so hopefully we can cover all your questions and fears and maybe ideas that you can bring to me later. Feel free to post any questions or concerns or ideas on the Q&A or on the chat, and we can look at those later concerning tables. So I just wanted to pause for a second, and now I'm going to move to the next slide, images in color. Okay, unfortunately, I will share this with you. Don't do the same mistake. When working with other educators, teachers, professors, sometimes we send them reports of content in their class. We have multiple testers with multiple abilities and and knowledge about different kinds of assistive technology who review courses, review classes. We mostly work with hybrid online and digital content. But we also work often with printed materials, also working closely with the office, with the disability office at my institution. And oftentimes, yes, the culprits are the images. There are lots of images in certain classes like geography, art history. Some of these classes are image heavy. And they're important. I can see why, in some cases, you really want to use images in your class. And it's not to say don't use images. Sometimes some educators get frustrated because we tell them, hey, you really have to have an alternative text description for every image so that those who can't see the image very well or can't rely on the image for knowledge will still be able to access the information of the image in some form. Think of that as a figure caption, right, for every image. So they get frustrated and then they drop the images, and the course maybe checks the box for accessibility standards, but it's very boring. So I will say, keep your images. If you have something pretty, if you have color, keep it, use it. Just use some of these tricks to make them accessible for everyone. So what is alt text? I don't know if you've ever dabbled into both, in Google Suite, in Microsoft Word. You may have seen sometimes, maybe if you right click on an image, maybe because you want to resize it or crop it, you may have seen that one of the items shown on the pop-up when you right click on an image or Shift F10 on an image, it will say edit alt text. Well, alt text is common in accessibility lingo. It stands for alternative text description. And this is used for visual media, such as images, charts, photographs, animated GIFs. And both non-visual users and users with cognitive disabilities benefit from a text equivalent description of the image. Think of that as some kind of a figure caption that you can also add. You can hide it, so the only users who use screen reader technology or text-to-speech software will hear that. Not everyone maybe needs to read the text description. Limit the alt text to 100 characters, because for the most part, if you're actually adding alternative text description in the relevant alt text box, and I'm going to show you later what that means and how to do it, the technology will stop at the 120th character mark, because it is the alt text is really expected to be just for a figure caption, describe the figure. Sometimes I mentioned the geography example. You may be showing maps, and yes, you can use a figure caption, but the alt text alone will not convey what you're trying to tell your students about what is shown on the map. So complex images, that's how we call them, complex images such as maps, charts, even pictures where you really want to, maybe in an art appreciation class, you want to go beyond saying picture of a dog running on the grass. Maybe you want to go deeper into the description of the picture. So that might need long text description, and you can put the long text description on the main paragraph for everyone to look at next to the image. Or maybe you're presenting the image in Canvas, and maybe you can link out to the long text description in a Word document and embed the Word document below the image. For example, you can do that as well. I'll show you in this particular example from one of the textbooks from CLET World Languages. This textbook is showing lots of images. It is pretty, I like it. And by all means, I love these images, they're high quality. I don't think they should drop them. So one way of making those accessible would just be to, there are ways with, if you're using Canvas, if you're using Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel as well, because it's all Office products, PDF, you can go and follow the tools I'm going to show you later, and you can add alt text. For example, in this particular images, we have, for example, a lady who is climbing a wall. Lady who's climbing a wall. You don't even have to say photograph of or picture of, because the screen reader will tell them that this is a graphic. So they know they're looking at an image. So you can just say lady climbing a wall, or maybe person climbing a wall. Or maybe the second picture in the second row, people running on the beach holding a surfboard. The other picture could be 4 people smiling and looking at the photographer. The picture at the top on the right hand side, but still on the left page, professional digital camera, or there's another roller coaster, red roller coaster, with the sky in the background. So you see, I'm showing you examples of very brief, it's like figure captions. So think of those that way, something that signals to the user, this is what the image is about. They're not just hearing graphic and wondering, how important is this? What is this? What am I missing out? And speaking of color, like I said before, color is important, but you want to be mindful of how you use color. There are many color contrast checkers out there. So all these links are clickable. So once CLET World Languages shares with you the PowerPoint, the Google Sites, you will be able to click on those and find them. You can also Google right now and check them out, because they show up immediately in your Google search. TPGI, it's spelled the British way, TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer. And in the screen capture on the right is actually a screen capture of the user interface of the TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer. I love it because you actually need to know the hex numbers for every color. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but in web design and development, every single color is associated with a series of 6 alphanumerical characters. So you don't need to think about that. You don't need to worry about that. I love this tool because you can use a dropper tool from this interface. I'm going to show you, with my cursor. You may be familiar with the dropper tool if you have already used Paint, right? So let's say you want to, even using the color contrast analyzer, and you want to select, you can actually, when you're using it and you click the dropper tool, it will magnify and it will enable you to select the color that you want to check. Like, let's say you want to check CLET World Languages, the white text on blue background. So you can select your foreground color, and then you can hit the dropper tool to select your background color and click on your chosen color, and it will show you if it passes the standard. Right now, this easy example is black text on white background, and so obviously it passes the standard. I know there are some considerations with reference to some people with dyslexia who prefer slightly lower color contrast. So I'm aware of that. When looking just at the web accessibility standards, what you see here, WCAG 2.1 results. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and these are usually the guidelines that we use to check if content meets the standards for digital accessibility. And the minimum is AA. AAA is like above and beyond, let's say. But I'm also aware that obviously, according to WCAG, and for people with visual disabilities, if you do black text on white background, great. But I know that for some user, it's not so great. So I'm going to mention that later in the presentation, but if there is a way for you to create content that even the end user can customize for themselves, like you send them a Word document or a Google slide, and then they can change the color to however they want for themselves, that's even better. Some other free color contrast checkers are ColorZilla and the WebAIM color contrast checker. Another example of good and bad color contrast, you know, the image on the left where it shows estoy contento, estoy triste with a thumbs up and a thumbs down. In this particular case, estoy contento and estoy triste is written in darker gray, and the background is in a lighter gray, but it's not as light. So I'm not using, I'm presenting now and I'm not using any color contrast checker, but if I were to use the color contrast analyzer, I would hit the dropper symbol, select the dark gray, and then click on it, and then hit the dropper symbol, and then select the lower, the lighter gray, and it will probably tell me it fails. The example on the right, I would probably use a color contrast checker just to be sure, but I can already tell a little bit using common sense that it is more readable. The text is actually now written in black on a gray background, on a light gray background. And this is an example of using color, of course, but not just color. I would say the three ideal ingredients for an accessible pie chart or line graph or other complex image where you're using showing different kinds of trends is to use color, sure, to use labels, labeling, like each slice of this pie is also labeled, and to use different kinds of patterns. You might see there are different sites that every pattern is unique. So for example, here, this is an example of a pie chart showing the primary desktop and laptop screen readers, which ones are the most popular screen readers. So for example, here it's showing that JAWS and NVDA lead the bunch with each of them up to about 40%. The NVDA color is green and the JAWS pie color is light blue, but the patterns are different. You know, the way the stripes are oriented are different. One is from left to right and the other is from top to bottom. In some other, for example, the voiceover is purple, but also has vertical lines. The Zoom text pie chart slice is black, but it has horizontal lines as well. And the other is red and also has some kind of strange patterns with spirals. So you could even use like small triangle shape, or maybe patterns of small dots or squares. And another benefit of that is not just a percentage of colorblind users, but how many times do we find ourselves, me included, at home? I have a black and white printer. Not that I ever really needed printers very much these days for personal use, maybe for professional use more. But actually right now, we've had a couple of times at work, only the black and white printer that was usable, and the color print, a separate one, had some issues. So it often happens that whatever we need to print, we may not always have access to a color printer. And so something like this will really help everyone, even people who are not colorblind, because now you no longer have to rely just on color to appreciate what is on the pie chart. You really don't need color. So even if it's black and white, it will be fine. So I'm going to pause for another moment now and see if anyone in the meantime, to give you time, just half a minute, to give you time to type any questions that you might have on the Q&A or in the chat, because again, I know it's a lot of content that we're going over tonight, and I also wanted to go over some other low-hanging fruit that I usually start with. I always start with what I'm going to show you next, which is the built-in accessibility checkers in Word, in PowerPoint, in PDF, in Google Suite, and all of that. So I'm going to stop, like I said, for just this minute to give you time to type your questions, because maybe at the end of the presentation, you may have already forgotten about what you wanted to ask me. So I wanted to give you that opportunity. And now, well, let's get started on simple strategies built in accessibility checkers. I think we're making good timing, I hope. If you're using Microsoft Word documents, when you open your Word document, like I said before, by default, your tab is the Home tab. Navigate to Review. From Review, hit Check Accessibility. And when you click Check Accessibility, it will show you a list of errors, warnings, and tips on the right-hand side of your Word document. So in this particular case, I'm showing you an example of my syllabus. I hit Review, Check Accessibility, and it's showing me there is a missing alternative text and a warning that there is hard to read text contrast. Again, color contrast, that's what they mean. In Google Docs, you go to the Tools tab from the toolbar, select Accessibility towards the bottom, and that's how you run the accessibility checker in Google Docs. It will show you a similar list of issues. This is a video demo. It's a mute video demo, but I'm going to be the speaker here, narrate it. So right now, I'm showing you that I've already run my accessibility checker, and it's flagging that the image here, I'm using an image of a book cover. I'm sure it's common among all of you. You have your syllabus and you want to show an image of the book cover to inform your students of what is this, how to expect your textbook to look like if, you're planning on purchasing it or what have you. I forgot to add the alt text in this particular case, and the checker is flagging that as an error, missing alt text. So how you can fix that? You can go straight from the checker, where it's showing picture 1, it's telling me where the missing alt text is, and I can hit the downward arrow on the right-hand side of the picture to add, I don't know if you can actually see it here, but it will say add description. It will actually say add description or mark as decorative. So if the image is decorative, it's just pretty, it doesn't matter, then you can just check mark decorative and it will be skipped by screen reader technology. You will just ignore it. Or you can edit the alt text. You can click on it and add the alt text. Or another way to add the alt text to an image in Word is to right click on the image. You select the image like I'm doing right now, and right click on the image, or Shift F10. Shift F10 is the keyboard equivalent of right click. Go to edit alt text from the pop-up, and that's, will open a box on the right-hand side. There is no save button. You just type it in the box and it will automatically save. And then you just exit out. And in this particular case, it's showing, yay, green check mark. All your accessibility issues are resolved. And that applies to also other, if you're using PowerPoint, it's the same thing. If you're using Excel, it's the same thing. Right click on the image, navigate, find alt text, and then enter the alt text. It's as easy as that. So for PDF, one small caveat about PDF. You can run a PDF accessibility checker, and you can fix issues in a PDF for accessibility in a very simple way. PDFs are a pain in the neck for many things, but at the same time, there are ways in which you can make a PDF very accessible from zero accessibility to a lot of accessibility in just a few clicks. The caveat is you need to have Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. You might also be using some other software as well, but for the most part, I maybe share it in the text chat, but I'm not aware of Adobe Reader or other free software. I used to use many years ago PDF Fill for some editing PDF capacity, but Adobe Acrobat Pro DC and Comma Look, for all I know in my knowledge, are really the only one that enable you to make your PDF accessible. So you have to have access to the paid software, Adobe Acrobat Pro DC. If you're working, in your school, in your college, you should, at most colleges and school, in my experience, I don't want to say maybe most, but in my experience of the colleges and schools and universities that I interacted with, you should have access to a license. For example, if you're on campus and you're using you're issued a work computer, or if you're using a computer on campus, like at the library, for example, they usually have Adobe Acrobat Pro DC installed on that computer. So with that in mind, open your PDF. Imagine you have, the PDF document in front of you. In the upper left-hand corner, navigate to Tools. Navigate away from from your own document, but go to Tools. Scroll down from the tools, you will see Enhanced Scans, Edit PDF, Print, etc., etc. You will see lots of symbols, but you want to find the Accessibility tool. Adobe does a good job of hiding the important accessibility stuff. They're there, they just hide them. I don't know why. So go to the accessibility symbol, which is a symbol, the purple symbol of a human inside the circle, click add, and now will turn into open. So to the right-hand side of your PDF of your Word document, now you will see the accessibility tool, the accessibility symbol, and it will stay there. As soon as you go through this first step one time and you access the same computer, the accessibility tool will stay there. So when you click accessibility checker, everything should already be by default checked here. I don't think you need to check or uncheck anything. Usually by default, everything is checked there. So you will see this pop up and just hit start checking from the pop up at the bottom. And that will show you issues on the left-hand side of the document. And if you just address the document issues, there are multiple issues there, but if you start with document issues, like you have a bad scan in front of you, scanned PDFs, think of those as, they're treated as images. You know, if you run a book chapters through a scanner and you scan them, they're rendered as usually PNG or JPEG. And so a screen reader will read them as such, will just say graphic, and that's all it will say. It will not know there is text there. But there are ways in which this can be fixed. If you go to image only PDF, right click and fix, it will actually run what is called, Adobe will run what's called optical character recognition. So it will recognize the text slowly but surely, and then it will transform that PDF into something with readable text, which is great. So let's show you this quick demo. I have a PDF, a book chapter in front of me. You may not see very well because unfortunately this example is actually a good looking scan, but sometimes I've seen like crooked text. You know, I've seen some scans, particularly of like 1970s book chapters that are less than optimal. To use a diplomatic word. So in this particular case, I actually have a book chapter in front of me that's just a scan. So it's just graphic. You know, if I run a screen reader, it will just tell me graphic, blank, 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 blank. That's what it tells me. That's it. But I want that to be able to read to the user chapter case 4, even better, maybe to read heading level 1, chapter case 4, heading level 2, Nike score competency, and then with annual review revenues and all that. So there is actually a very time efficient way to move from graphic to something like that. So I already have accessibility in my list of tools here on the right hand side. I click accessibility. I click accessibility check with the menu that opens from the accessibility tool. I open the pop-up, the pop-up gets open and I hit start checking. So all the problems I highlighted in bold are on the left-hand side of the page. I only want to focus on the document issues because this is really the majority of issues. I expand with the downward arrow next to document. I right-click image only PDF to run optical character recognition. So it will, document language English. So it's already showing by default what it's detecting. And so it takes a while, usually 10 seconds at most, if it's a long document, maybe more. So now you can see I can even select the text. Actually, I didn't show you later, but the text, I was unable to select the text. Tag PDF. So tags are actually the skeleton, the structure of a PDF. You see there are no tags available right now. Not that you need to know more about that, but just know that when you see tag PDF fail, right click and fix all the time, because the tag structure is actually the heading that you see H1 and P. The tagging structure is actually the markup for example, chapter case 4, the tags will communicate to the user that's a heading level 1, and so on and so forth. And that's what the screen reader will read. So you want to simply right click and fix all the issues in the document section. Just start with that. I know that there may be other issues in a PDF, but this is a good quick start. So if you define the primary language so that the screen reader will recognize that that's English, or if the whole document is in Spanish or mostly in Spanish, we are probably better off using flagging that as Spanish, for example. There are ways in which you can also make a PDF accessible if it has multiple languages. It is not intuitive, but I'm not going to go down that route for now. I wouldn't call that a basic tip and trick. For logical reading order and color contrast, I decided to manually pass it because particularly for logical reading order, you as a teacher will know what you think is the optimal reading order for a student? Should they start with the title? Should they start with the image and then read the text? So that's something that really only the human can determine. But right now, as you can see, with the exception of a small item there from running the checker, like I said, if you already have accessibility checker there, you added in tools, click accessibility check, start checking, boom, list of issues, go into the document pane, right click and fix all the stuff that says fail. And you will have a document that it is auto tagged, but it is much more readable than what it was before. It would just say blank graphic, blank graphic. So I hope this was helpful. Before I move to the next slide, I know we're approaching the hour, but again, I just wanted to let you know, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A to ask them, and we'll go over them once the presentation is over. As I mentioned before briefly, not all users are mouse users. Maybe they are unable to use a mouse. For example, some people with mobility disabilities, they might prefer to use a keyboard, but also blind users and screen reader users, they only use a keyboard. They can't use a mouse. So one way, a very quick and easy way, a very basic, will not catch all the issues, but just to make you appreciate, and give you an idea if a page is somewhat keyboard accessible or not, would be to do the keyboard test. So for the most part, to navigate a page, you can use tab, just the tab button, or shift tab if you want to go back, the previous element. Tab to go forward, shift tab to go backwards. If you find that you cannot access parts of the content, if you don't see the buttons being highlighted by the tab, you're unsure where you are, you're kind of confused now, or the order seems illogical, maybe the next button is actually not shown as the next button, that's probably a sign that it is not very accessible. In this particular case, I ran a Google search on the Lunar New Year, which just started a few days ago, and I'm going to use now just the keyboard. You see actually the 3 little dots highlighted there, the tools, more, the tools, video, images. You may be seeing in this demo that buttons are being highlighted. I'm using actually shift tab to go backwards. So now I'm tabbing. You see, I'm tabbing, and it seems like it's following a logical order. Every button is being highlighted by the keyboard. It seems to follow a logical order. So I guess, Google is probably a good example of something that's accessible, but just, try that yourself with your, on your website, just open it, leave the mouse for a moment and just tab, keep tabbing and see what you find. So I will say in general, as a take-home message, I will say if you can look for content that can be customized by the end user, maybe they can even choose their own color or choose their own font size. It really goes a long way. It's even easier. Offer some degree of flexibility. For example, one example I can share with you, there was an educator who wanted their students to produce a video presentation using a specific kind of software that I'm not going to mention because things also change. This kind of software that the professor wanted the students to use is not very accessible. But they wanted the students to produce a video presentation, which could be done, with YouTube. There are so many, Zoom as well. There are so many tools that are available out there, even on the iPhone. Anyone can even shoot a video on the iPhone and upload it to Canvas or Google or whichever platform you use. But at the time, the professor was adamant about using this particular software because they liked it. And they said, but I love this software. I want all of them to be able to learn how to use the software. And I said, that's fine, but don't force, if the learning outcome, if what the assignment that you want them to be able to learn and produce is to create a video presentation, and that's really all that matters, give them the flexibility to choose the tool that they want, so long as you as a professor can access them, can view them. Because obviously if it requires to only be logged in on that software product, that might be more complicated. But also I think last but not least, the teacher's commitment to accessibility, even starting from an awareness. Like I said before, I've seen situations where on paper and digital and printouts and all that, the content was, large font size, use of images, but also with text descriptions, everything looked great, but the teacher wasn't very cooperative. And I've seen situations where with teachers who maybe had a complicated course, maybe a course in geographic information science with lots of maps and lots of issues for accessibility, but they went out of their way to try to look for tools or try to learn. I know it might be maybe more work sometimes when you're finding yourself in the middle of a situation. But I will say really the key player here, even more than the accessibility specialist, is the teacher. It really is you, if you're the teacher and listening. It really makes a huge difference. Even if your class is not perfect, even if your class has some accessibility issues, in the grand scheme of things, your role is even more important. And the students will appreciate that. So here's a list of references from the figures that I cited before. This is my contact, my personal contact, tpheap@gmail.com, and my work contact, tanya.heap@unt.edu. You can check out some basic best practices for PowerPoint, Word, and PDF accessibility at the links provided. Once CLET World Languages shares the PowerPoint with you, these are all come from WebAIM. WebAIM is a great resource for accessibility tips. And you can also contact accessibility@cletwl.com. Thank you for watching today.
So, Tanya, our first question is, I am a blind teacher with a mild case of cerebral palsy teaching sighted students. Would you have any recommendations for me in improving my skills in common tech tools with using assistive technology to make presentations effective for sighted students?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, I was reading the Q&A, and I will say common tech tools. Well, some of those that I mentioned in the presentation, they're free. I'm sure that, again, thinking of tools that use assistive technology to make presentations effective. If you're talking about, it also depends what type of presentations you're talking about. So I'm not sure, so I'm going to cover multiple types. For example, like I said before, if you're doing video-based presentations, I know that some blind users that work in my team, they might even use an iPhone to create a video. Zoom could be an option as well. If you're using Canvas and you have a license for Studio, Canvas Studio is fairly accessible. I've heard some issues with NVDA. You might want to try with JAWS. I know that people with very low vision who use Zoom text were able to create video presentations in Studio. So it really also depends on what type of assistive technology you're most comfortable with. But I will say, I know that PowerPoints, creating a PowerPoint within a Google slide is based on my conversations with peers and colleagues who are blind. They're not huge fans of those. What we have worked with in the past was really using, for example, Google Docs, or even just Word documents with nice use of headings to present content. And oftentimes you don't even need, again, a PowerPoint presentation if all you're going to present is just bullet points. It could be just a Word document, and it's as easy as that. Over a Google document, you can just share. So often I advocate to just keep things simple. But if there is an image that that your sighted students will love, and there are ways like I think Google Docs are good for helping you. You locate where you want to put the image. You insert the image, and boom, they will be shown to them. So I think some of these tools are fairly easy to use. I wouldn't go on anything crazy. Whatever you already have access and you have available, I think should work. But of course, it also depends on what type of presentations you use, and also the assistive technology they use as well.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question says, a non-visual learner is what type of person exactly? You talked about improving the visual presentation for these people. What exactly does this mean? A non-visual learner cannot see well or prefers to listen. Can you clarify all this, please?
Sure. The reason why I said a non-visual, and sometimes I will say blind, but I don't always say that, is because, for example, I've also worked with people who were technically able to see, but they had a traumatic brain injury, so they were not really aware of what they were seeing. So we're talking about people who may have cognitive disabilities, may not even be blind, but they're unable to process the information visually in the same way. Some people, for example, are not able to process or recognize faces, for example. So it's really a broad spectrum of non-visual users or users for whom visual presentation, a majority of us, there's lots of research showing a majority of users rely on visuals, but there is a subset of people, not just blind and not just low vision, of course, those as well, who cannot rely on visuals alone. So it's really, they might rely on a combination of audio. Some of them use software like Kurzweil, for example. Don't know if any of you is familiar with Kurzweil. It's you don't need to, but just an example. It's a text-to-speech software, and it's really popular among people with cognitive or learning disabilities. It means they might be reading the text and doing that, but they also hear it. Some people love to be able to read and hear at the same time. So it really depends also sometimes on, non-branching into the accommodation realm, but sometimes, depending on the student, depending on what they use, it's good to know what they use and being able to make all of those modalities available. They can maybe read the text, they can listen to the text with their software. But of course, if there is an image there and it's just a visual and there is no text saying anything about the image, it will be hard for all these users to understand what the image is about. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. The next question would be, could you please go through the order for headings? Word, then styles, what order for Google?
Oh, for Google, okay.
Yeah.
So if you want to go, I show that it's also in the PowerPoint as well. But just so let me ask, I can remember all the passages. But if you're using Google documents for headings, you want to go into the Tools tab. So if you have like the Google Doc in front of you, go to not Tools tab, sorry, Tools is for Accessibility Checker, Format. So you want to go, if you have the Google Doc in front of you, navigate to Format, then Paragraph Styles, and then Headings. If you like, I can share again my screen very briefly, just briefly, because I know there are some people who have more questions to ask, but I'm going to go back to that one more time for Google. So if you have the Google document in front of you, navigate to Format, then in Format, navigate to Paragraph Styles. It's usually the second one after text, it's easy. And then select whichever heading you want to use. Don't use title, don't use subtitle, I know it's there, but it messes up the hierarchy if you're trying to transfer this Google Doc into PDF or some other formats. I don't know why it's there. I think it should be deprecated, but that's my opinion. I think you should just focus on normal text, obviously for paragraphs, but it's a heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and all that. So I hope that answers your question. I'm gonna stop sharing again.
Perfect. So next question would be, what other advice could you give us on creating accessible materials? For example, what fonts should we use? And also if we could prepare bilingual alt text for authentic documents, for example, posters or anything on that line.
Okay, yeah, that's the second one goes into, I wouldn't call it basic accessibility territory. We have information about that as well, and I can even put that on the chat if it's helpful for anyone. So as far as font styles, I will say for digital documents, I don't know if any of you have heard that in the news. Maybe I do because I always follow those channels. But anyway, the US government really very recently released a statement that they're going to officially abandon the support of the default font Times New Roman, and they will officially endorse Calibri or similar sans serif fonts. The difference between serif and sans serif, serif fonts like Times New Roman are those fonts where I'm not an expert, but are the ones that usually have some endings, and yeah, maybe the M also has a small, like a little arm there, something that's sticking out. These were useful for small printed newspapers, for example, at the beginning of the last century. But not really useful for digital. It is hard to process. Again, if you have a scanned page and it's a Times New Roman, usually when you scan it and you convert it in PDF and the PDF, Adobe tries to run optical character recognition, sometimes it will not recognize the characters the way they should be. It's easier for characters to be recognized if they're in sans serif font, so without the little serifs there, like Calibri, Arial, Verdana, Helvetica. So I would say my favorite fonts are Arial, Calibri, Verdana, Helvetica. Not a fan of Taoma. You may be familiar with Taoma as well, because it has a short kerning. Kerning stands for the space between letters. It's really tight. I'm also dyslexic, by the way, and I find that confusing. I mix up things. Maybe it's not the same for everyone, but I think Verdana is similar to Toma, but I think it's more readable, at least for me. There is also specific software, specific font, also paid font for people with dyslexia. That I haven't really used myself, but I know it's really beneficial for some users. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'm sure a Google search will find that. And I think you had another question, Sabrina, was the font size. And I think it was some font style. I think there was some, yes, the different alt text in different languages. Okay. Yes. Here is the sticky point a little bit. It's easier with Word. It is easier with Word, but in Canvas, it is not easy unless you have some extra. So if you're a foreign language teacher, and of course you have a combination of content online that's both in, let's say, English and Spanish, or English and Italian, or English and French, you want to be sure that the screen reader, if you're a screen reader user or a text-to-speech user, you want the voice to change their pronunciation. You want them to read everything in French with proper French pronunciation, in English with proper English pronunciation. Visually, you might discern that if you're just a reader, but if you're not a reader, you can only listen, and you don't properly provide the proper language attribution for anything that's in the language other than the default, which might be English, then will be read like a very bad, let's say, American student who is trying to learn Spanish. Like instead of saying como se dice, they will say como se dice. So it's really unhelpful. So in Word, I wonder if I can maybe show you on the fly an example. Yes, let me share my screen quickly and I can show you what I use in Word documents to change the different language, the different languages in the in a text document that has different multiple languages, right? This is just a very simple example. I opened the first document that's in front of me, this essay. So I'm going to show you. So I'm on a Word document. I'm going to navigate to review. You familiarize with review because it's important, because it's also the same tab that includes check accessibility. So here you want to go to from review to language, set proofing language. So let's say, for example, here we have El Niño. We want the screen reader to read El Niño, not El Nino. So I select El Niño and I want that to be in Spanish. So I go to language, set proofing language, and here I can select if I want to use Spanish Mexico or even Spanish España. So I can navigate in the language pop-up. I can go down and, with the arrow or using your mouse if you're a mouse user, and select your chosen proofing language. In this particular case, I'm going to say Spanish Mexico, hit OK. So now I know will be read properly. Word document, I'm more familiar with Microsoft products than I am with Google. So I also appreciate Clet Word Languages for providing some information about the Google Suite. I'm sure there is a way of doing that, and an easy way that I can learn of doing that in Google Sheets and in Google Docs. I will say in Canvas, it is a little bit more complicated. I don't want to scare you, but it involves going into the HTML of the page and insert a lang attribution. I can send you actually a link if you're interested. That's probably easier than just explaining that, because the link also includes some visuals. It comes from my own institution. So I'm going to share it actually to everyone. Okay, so in this link, I'm showing, these are a series of, it's a tutorial with both text and also pictures without text. Let me know if the alt text is not adequate. I appreciate feedback. And it will show you how to, in this particular case, I need to add a point on PDF, because there is a way of doing that on PDF as well. I haven't added that one yet, but this list of instructions shows how to change the language tagging if you have a content in multiple languages in Canvas and in all Microsoft products. So PowerPoint, Word, Excel, etc.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now for the next question, going back to fonts, could you please include the recommendations for fonts, especially for different learners?
Yeah, I mean, different learners would like to know what kind of learners you mean. I will say in general, like I said before, in online environments particularly, but also in printouts, unless the printouts are smaller, and just in print, I know Times New Roman apparently still more readable in printouts, and particularly the font is smaller, even though I don't recommend very small fonts. Try to increase them if you can, if you have the possibility. But in digital environments, definitely sans serif. So again, those that don't have the additional things, the additional decoration surrounding them, the different space. So like I said, Arial, Helvetica, Verdana, Taoma. Taoma, yes, but like I said, the kerning is really small, so there is less space between one letter and the other. So for some students, it might be more confusing. So I would say stick to Calibri. Calibri is the standard in Microsoft Office products. I would even change that. If that's what the official US government is recommending, I would stick with that. I love Arial. It's bigger, it's simple. Arial is my favorite personally, but I'm not sure, again, customizing, right? If you're giving them a Word document, the students maybe can even select and change to their own font. I'm not a fan of Comic Sans. It's a little bit confusing. And I know a lot of people are moving away from that font as well.
Okay, great. Next question says, can they be done in Word and then copied and pasted in Canvas? Do those things get carried across? I think this refers to what we were talking about, bilingual text.
Yeah, that's a good question about, I know it's common. We all have done that at some point because it saves time, copying over from Word to Canvas. Sometimes if you want to create accessible Canvas content, it might actually not save you time starting from Word and copying to Canvas. You can do that. It might create, depending on how rich is your Word document, maybe you have different font sizes and pictures and colors. I'm not sure. It depends on what you have on your Word document. The simpler, the better, even if you copy and paste. Be sure when you paste it into Canvas to see if the heading level structure is carried over. The other thing I would recommend is to select the whole text, whatever you're posting in Canvas. Otherwise, it might look weird. Sometimes the font styles change, whenever, you move from one platform to the other, it doesn't always carry over well. So we recommend once you copy everything from Word and you post it into Canvas, select everything you have in Canvas. There is a button that's called clear formatting. It's usually the button for clear formatting, the symbol of a T, like an italicized T with a rubber. And if you click that and you hit clear formatting, it will still carry over any list that you have or headings, but it will just be clean. It will use the standard font size, the default font size in Canvas, and it will look it won't look like something that's been copied and pasted from multiple sources.
Perfect. And now let's go for the last question. Can I use these formats to create a book?
Yes, yeah, I would say it also depends on what you mean by book. In this day and age, lots of people have paper books, but also ebook, both. I would say in general, if you're trying to create a book and you want to make it available in both print and digital, I would still go, again, personally speaking, I would still go with a font size that's reasonable, not too small. I would still go with sans serif, with a large kerning like Verdana, very large in space. Even the default font size here in Zoom, I like that. I think it's clear where when one letter ends and when the other begins. So something like that. I will also say, be careful with the right to justify. I know it also depends on, what your publisher recommends for styling. That's also another territory beyond accessibility. I will say in general that while both left and right justified, all the same length looks pretty, sometimes you can create formatting issues where the last sentence is, only has 3 words and they go all the way to the end. It can be confusing. And for some learners, the extra space can throw them off. So I know that usually for accessibility, leaving everything just left justified, but not right justified is easier because every single word is spaced. They're all spaced at the same, they all have the same space between words. And so that's easier for users with learning disabilities, including some users with dyslexia. I hope that's helpful. And I will say also for books, headings. Use headings because with 3 clicks in the references section in Word, you can build a table of contents, you can build a list of figures. It saved me so much time even on my own dissertation. I love styles and headings for that reason as well.
Perfect. So once again, thank you very much, Tanya. I think everything was very clear and useful as well. And thank you to all the attendees. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at accessibility@cletwl.com. And Thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a nice evening.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope it was helpful. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.